The theme of youth in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird, a novel written by Harper Lee, is a novel giving us insight on the reality of a child seeing hypocrisy, evil, and injustice in an adult reality. This novel offers us the perspective of a child's thoughts and behavior through the characters of Jean Louise and Jeremy French. They reveal that the sense of justice of a child is in fact not learned, but in fact innate, and that therefore adults must have learned to become unjust. To Kill a Mockingbird also suggests that children aren't just miniature versions of adults, but they're in fact fully fledged beings with their own thoughts, ideas, and motives. It also acknowledges the incapability of adults of not being able to understand children's thoughts. These topics translate very well into a child in the modern society. Throughout the entirety of the novel, the theme of youth is richly developed, and we see its presence at several instances. These are some of its various moments.
In part one of the novel, we see Jem, Dill, and Scout playing. This is an example of youth being creative as well as slightly childish. Their game is that they are playing the Radleys. They take what they see as the characters in their community and portray them in their own personal way. Another example is Scout talking to Uncle Jack. She explains to him that he doesn't really understand children at all. This is because he doesn't listen to Scout's side of the story. Knowing this, that youth has their own points of views and different than us adults. Another example is Jem not leaving his treehouse. This is an example of him being naive. He is doing this out of spite because Atticus isn't doing what he wants. He has no real way of portraying this emotion, so he does an action like sitting up in his treehouse all day. Later in the novel, we see Francis talking to Scout about how Atticus is a disappointment to the family and how he is the only reason why Aunt Alexandra is very upset. He takes these words and he's taking them from Aunt Alexandra. He doesn't understand most of the sense, which is another example of adults influencing youth. Also later, we see Jem, Dill, and Scout trying to get Boo Radley to come out of the house. This is very childish as well, and it's an example of youth, because later in the book, as they develop their characters, they later understand that this is not his choice, this is not their choice, but Boo Radley's choice is to stay inside the house. Also, the whole issue with Scout and her trousers is also an example of youth. Scout does not want to conform to the societal beliefs of being a girl. She wants to wear pants and she wants to play. This is an example of her not wanting to grow up and not letting go of her youth. Finally, in part one, we see Scout fighting a lot with Walter, Cecil Jacobs, and Francis. This is an example of youth because it's her way of explaining how she feels towards people calling out her family. Because she is a youth, she does not understand how to use her emotions and to use them in a good way, so she takes them out with violence.
The theme of youth is portrayed at several instances in part 2 of To Kill a Mockingbird. We see it firstly when Scout asks Calpurnia what rape is. This shows a great deal of innocence from Scout's part. Because Scout is so young, she doesn't understand the negative connotation behind rape. She is not only not old enough nor mature enough to fully comprehend its real meaning, therefore Calpurnia kind of brushes off and leaves it for Atticus to explain it at a more appropriate time. We can also see it when Jem stands up to Atticus after he had told him to leave Tom Robinson's cell. Here we see a great deal of maturity from Jem. When Atticus had told him to leave, Jem refused several times. You see, Atticus is Jem's father, therefore he is his authority figure. Jem not obeying Atticus shows a great deal of growth from his part. We can also see the theme of youth through Mayella's character. Mayella is a person who had lost her mother and her father was not absent. She had many siblings to take care of, who might have been her children. She had her youth stolen from her, and she didn't have the possibility to make friends, and she had a family that didn't respect her, so she never learned social cues and how to interact appropriately with others. So when Atticus referred to her as Miss, she interpreted it as a sign of disrespect and it made her mad. We can also see a great deal of innocence from Dill's character when he was crying at the trial. His actions displayed such the innocence of a child because it reinforces the theme that kids do have an innate sense of justice, and it is not something that is taught, and it's more something that is unlearned because he's crying. We can also see it through Jem being sad at the outcome of the trial. Jem is sad because he is aware of this being wrong. He knows the actions of the people of Maycomb were not good, and they were in fact unjust towards Tom Robinson. But he also is sad because he sees his father, his authority, in a vulnerable state after being lost, making him more.
Now we will go into more depth about youth portrayed by characters, specifically Jem and Scout Finch. Jean Louise and Scout are the narrators or main characters of this novel. In the beginning, they were very innocent, naive. They had their whole life thinking that it was very good, very, very bright. But as the novel progressed, they further faced by evil, hypocrisy, societal, racism, everything. And it made them more knowledgeable to the issues surrounding them in their small little city. So we're going to talk about how they portray the youth and how they see that the world is being changed through their eyes of growing.
Starting off with the character of Jean Louise Finch. The character of Jean Louise displays the innocence of an ignorant child. Because of her young age, Scout can see the world from fresh eyes along with her innate sense of justice, allowing her to place her own judgment and act according to her own beliefs. This is portrayed very well in chapter 15. In this chapter, Atticus is confronted by a group of men who plan to kill Mrs. Tom Robinson. Mr. Cunningham is present in this group. Recognizing him, Scout spontaneously joins the group, blissfully unaware of what really is going on. Her complete state of ignorance shocks the group and really benefits her and her father as it makes the group leave. In this scene, Scout's actions are purely dictated by her own desires. Scout's innocence is also demonstrated in chapter 9, in which she is present at a gathering at the Finch's Landing. There, she is confronted by her cousin Frances, who calls her father a black person lover. Scout reacts very poorly to this, although she doesn't understand what the term black person lover means. She states this to her Uncle Jack. A black person lover? I ain't sure what it means, but the way Frances said it, tell you one thing, Uncle Jack, I swear before God if I sit here and let him say something about it. Here, Scout acted purely out of her own judgment on what it meant to be a black person lover. She was truly ignorant to what the insult meant, but she decided to act anyway. We can see a drastic change of behavior towards the end of the book. As she ages, we see Scout become more aware of her surroundings and more capable of assessing the situation in which she is found. At the beginning of the novel, Scout lacked perspective and the ability to control her emotions. But as the novel progressed, Scout matured, and Atticus helped her develop her sense of morality. As Scout became more mature, her hospitality also greatly developed. We see this contrast to her behaviors through her interactions with Walter Cunningham and Mrs. Meriwether. With Walter Cunningham, we see Scout behave rudely, and then she criticizes him and outwardly disrespects him, leaving him feel very uneasy. But after Calpurnia teaches her what to do right and how her behavior was really childish, we are later shown Scout's growth in hospitality with Aunt Alexandra's guest. When they were present, Scout received the news of Tom Robinson's passing, but instead of alarming her guest, she behaved like a lady, and it states that she looked at the tray of cookies on the table, nodded at them, she carefully picked them up, and watched herself walk to Mrs. Meriwether. With her best company mother, she asked herself if she could have some. These changes in behaviors were the result of her being highly impacted by those surrounding her. One of the most prominent figures in the Scout's life is Atticus. Atticus has shared many impactful advice in Scout's life. He had once told her that you can never really understand a person until you consider things from their point of view, until you climb around in their skin and walk around in it. Scout was very much able to put this advice into practice. In the final chapter of this novel, Scout was able to do exactly what Atticus told her. We she saw life through Boo's lenses. She was able to walk through as if she was Mr. Radley, and after she does so, she realizes to herself that Atticus was in fact right, and she realizes the impact that he had on her. She states to herself, Atticus was right. One time he said that you can never really know a man until you stand around in the shoes and walk around in them.
Jem's character shows a lot about youth throughout the novel. An example is that Scout narrates, Jem naturally was Boo. He went under the front steps and shrieked and howled from time to time. This is a quote where she explains how they were playing. Again, they were very creative. His coming up with this game and him taking lead and showing leadership is also skills that him as a youth would have. Another quote is Scout narrating, Jem sat for breakfast until sunset and would have remained overnight had not Atticus severed his supply lines. This is referring to the time that Jem stayed in the treehouse for almost an entire day out of spite because Atticus told him that he wouldn't play football for the Methodists. Jem was very naturally angry about this, and he, as a youth, did not know how to portray his emotions in a healthy way about this because of his age. So he did this action that he thought was quite radical, and he decided to stay in his treehouse for the entire day. Another example is when Jem said, Atticus is a gentleman just like me. This shows how youth is often influenced by adults. Atticus is a gentleman, yes, and Jem is seeing to it that he is also a gentleman, which implies that to him, Atticus is a role model. This explains why he wants to be like Atticus so much, and Atticus influences Jem's personality and development from youth to adult. And finally, Scout explains that Jem cited, it ain't right, all the way to the corner of the square. This is after the trial occurred, and Jem was naturally very frustrated. These were some big topics for a young child, and he did not know how to express the way that he was feeling, his anger towards society. So he voiced his opinion, even though knowing it wouldn't change anything, but he thought maybe if he said this that something else would change. So this is an example of youth trying to show their opinion and being quite naive in the moment and not being very knowledgeable of the world's events.
In the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, it was the hardships of life that permitted Scout and Jem to mature. I found that this theme translates very well into the reality of a certain group of kids today. I found it particularly true in the case of African American children. A study found that 20% of African American boys showed the signs of puberty at the age of only 6 years old, but only 10% of Caucasian kids showed these signs. This research also states that the leading factor influencing those statistics were the socio-economic condition in which these boys lived. These socio-economic conditions created toxic stress. This stress being the result of their social class, their income status, and most importantly, their race. Although these children's circumstances are far from different from Scout and Jem's circumstances, but they too found themselves in the same boat of maturing faster than most due to the hardships of life.
Another example of youth portraying today is a young girl in the media, Greta Thunberg. I think everybody knows who she is. Like Scout and Jem, she has strong societal beliefs. She does not understand why society doesn't pay more attention to climate change because she believes that it is a big issue. Like Scout and Jem, don't understand why there is so much racism and why it's even relevant because they believe, like Atticus, that skin color doesn't matter. Um, she also has slightly an innocent point of view. Greta thinks like a child. She thinks that it is possible for us to change the world. She's very slightly optimistic about how she perceives society. So is Jem and Scout. Their point of view is very innocent as well. They are not comprehending a lot of the society because they are so naive and unknowledgeable. Finally, Greta Thunberg is often overlooked by whether it be powerful politicians, world leaders, other people in her social circle. This is a factor also with Scout and Jem because they are of a young age. Most people don't understand their point of view, so they often overlook it and not pay attention to their feelings personally. In conclusion, Scout and Jem are two characters that show youth the theme throughout the entire novel. They are children. You can see them grow from part 1 to part 2. They have lots of character development in the fact that they grow from being very ignorant and unknowledgeable. They get lots of information and start to understand society. Now, do you think that Scout and Jem's depiction of youth is still relevant in today's society?